The sound of mercy. A baby's cry stopped Jack Rowan dead in his tracks. He'd survived range wars, stampedes, and 2 winters in the Rockies, but nothing had ever frozen him like that sound. Thin, desperate, dying. Out here in the Dakota grasslands, miles from anywhere, a baby shouldn't exist. He turned his horse toward the sound, leather creaking in the terrible silence between cries. What he found changed everything. A woman collapsed in the tall grass, her dress soaked with blood and dirt, and beside her, an infant, purple-faced and screaming, wrapped in rags that had once been white. Before we continue, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe in second chances, hit that like button. Now, let's ride. The Dakota Territory didn't forgive mistakes. Jack Rowan had learned that truth the hard way. Through years of drifting from ranch to ranch, town to town, carrying everything he owned in saddlebags and asking nothing from anyone. At 34, his face showed the sun's punishment, lines etched deep around gray eyes that had seen too much and forgotten most of it on purpose. He'd been riding toward Willow Creek for 3 days, chasing wages owed from a cattle drive that had ended badly, when the cry cut through the afternoon heat. For a long moment, he sat motionless on his bay gelding, scout, listening. The prairie wind moved through the grass with a sound like rushing water, and the sun hammered down from a sky bleached white with heat. He'd almost convinced himself he'd imagined it when the cry came again, weaker this time, breaking into a wet, desperate cough. Jack touched his heels to Scout's flanks and rode toward the sound. The woman lay in a shallow depression where rainwater might have pooled in wetter seasons. Now it was just a bowl of cracked earth and dying grass, offering no shade and no mercy. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair matted against her skull and a face so pale it looked like bone china about to shatter. Her dress, once blue calico, was torn at the shoulder and stained with old blood. Beside her, wrapped in what might have been a christening gown weeks ago, the baby wailed with the fury of the starving. Jack dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He approached slowly, the way he'd approach a wounded animal, careful, watching for sudden movement. The woman didn't stir. He knelt beside her and touched 2 fingers to her throat. Her pulse fluttered like a trapped moth. "Ma'am?" His voice came out rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken to another soul in 4 days. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Nothing. The baby's cries intensified, and Jack turned his attention to the child. He could tell it was a girl from the tattered remains of the gown, couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 months old. Her face was mottled red and purple, her tiny fists clenched, her mouth open in a square of pure outrage and fear. When he picked her up, she weighed almost nothing. He could feel every rib through the thin fabric. "Jesus," he whispered, then caught himself. Words didn't matter out here, only action. He unbuttoned his own shirt with one hand, pulling it off and wrapping the baby against his bare chest. She quieted slightly at the warmth, her cries subsiding to whimpers. Jack had no experience with children, had spent his whole adult life avoiding the very idea of them, but instinct told him she needed heat and food, and he had only one of those things to offer. He turned back to the woman. Her breathing was shallow, irregular. Fever radiated from her skin like heat from a cook stove. When he lifted her eyelid, her pupil was dilated and unresponsive. The calculation was brutal and immediate. Willow Creek was at least 15 miles southeast. She wouldn't survive the ride slung over his saddle, and the baby wouldn't last another hour without milk. But staying here meant death for all 3 of them. The sun was already past its zenith, and when night came to the Dakota prairie in August, it brought storms that could drown a man standing upright. Jack looked at the baby, pressed against his chest, then at the woman dying in the dirt, then at the horizon where Willow Creek waited like a promise that might be broken. Damn it! He moved with the efficiency of a man who'd spent 20 years making impossible situations possible. First, he soaked his spare shirt in the last water from his canteen and draped it over the woman's face and neck, trying to bring down the fever. Then he pulled the saddle blanket from Scout's back and spread it on the ground. He lifted the woman as gently as he could. She was lighter than she should have been, all bone and dehydration, and laid her on the blanket. The baby whimpered against his chest. He could feel her mouth working, searching for milk he didn't have. I know, he murmured. I know. Just hold on. He fashioned a sling from his extra rope, creating a makeshift cradle that would hold the woman upright against his chest while he rode. It wasn't comfortable, but comfort didn't matter, only speed. He mounted Scout, settling the woman's limp weight against him, the baby secured between them in the wrapped shirt. The position was awkward, unbalanced, but it would have to work. Southeast, he told Scout, as if the horse needed direction. Fast as you can manage without killing us all. Scout's ears flicked back, then forward. The gelding had been Jack's only companion for 6 years, had carried him through blizzards and drought, and once, memorably, through a river in spring flood. If any horse could make this ride, it was Scout. They set out across the grassland at a canter that jarred Jack's teeth but ate up the miles. The sun beat down without mercy. Sweat ran down Jack's bare back, soaked into the woman's dress where it pressed against him. He could feel her heart beating, fast and thready, a desperate rhythm that seemed to be counting down. The baby cried for the first mile, then fell into an ominous silence. Jack pressed his hand against her tiny back, feeling for breath. Still there, still fighting. Come on, he said to the woman, though she couldn't hear him. Stay with me. Your baby needs you, whatever you're running from, whatever put you out here. She needs you to fight. The woman's head lolled against his shoulder. Up close, he could see the bruises, old ones, yellow and green, circling her upper arms like fingerprints. Fresh ones, purple-black, on her collarbone and jaw. The blood on her dress wasn't from childbirth. It was too high, too scattered. Someone had hurt her badly, and she'd run. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd seen plenty of cruelty in his years drifting, had participated in some of it, when he was younger and angrier and still thought violence could solve what words couldn't. But this was different. This was a woman alone with a baby, left to die under a Dakota sun because someone had decided she didn't deserve to live. You're going to make it, he said, and tried to believe it. Both of you. The miles crawled past. Scout's breathing grew labored, foam flecking his shoulders. Jack eased the pace to a trot, then had to push back to a canter when the baby's breathing started to shallow out again. Every decision was impossible. Every choice meant risk. The sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the grassland gold and amber. In other circumstances, it would have been beautiful. Now it just meant time running out. Jack saw the smoke first, thin gray columns rising from cook stoves and forge fires. Then the buildings took shape against the darkening sky. A dozen wooden structures scattered along a rutted main street, a church steeple pointing at the heavens like an accusation, corrals and water troughs, and the blessed promise of help. Willow Creek, he told Scout, his voice hoarse. We made it, just a little farther. He rode straight down the main street at a gallop that sent chickens scattering and dogs barking. People stopped to stare, a half-naked man on a lathered horse, carrying what looked like 2 bodies. Someone shouted. A woman screamed. Doctor! Jack's voice cracked across the evening air. I need a doctor. A man in a leather apron stepped out of the blacksmith's shop, his face hard with suspicion. What happened? Found them on the prairie. Woman's burning with fever. Baby's starving. Where's your doctor? End of the street. White house with the green shutters. The blacksmith's expression shifted from suspicion to concern. That baby alive? For now. Jack didn't wait for more questions. He pushed Scout into one final gallop, pulling up in front of the White House so hard the gelding's hooves threw gravel. An older man emerged from the front door, wiping his hands on a towel. He was perhaps 60, with silver hair and the calm, measuring gaze of someone who'd seen death too many times to panic at the sight of it. Dr. Hennessy? That's right. The doctor's eyes moved over the scene, the unconscious woman, the silent baby, Jack's bare, sunburned chest. Bring them inside, quickly. Jack dismounted in a controlled fall, his legs nearly buckling after hours in the saddle. He carried the woman up the porch steps and through the door into a clean spare room that smelled of carbolic and dried lavender. The doctor directed him to a narrow bed. Lay her here, gently. Is the baby injured? I don't think so, just hungry. And I don't know how long they were out there. Jack unwrapped the baby from his shirt and passed her to the doctor. The child's silence was worse than her earlier crying. Her eyes were closed, her face slack. For a terrible moment, Jack thought they'd lost her. Then she coughed, a wet, desperate sound, and her eyes opened. Blue, he saw. Dark blue, like a sky before snow. "She's dehydrated," Dr. Hennessy said. "But she's fighting. That's good." He raised his voice toward the back of the house. "Sarah, I need you." A woman appeared in the doorway, the doctor's wife, Jack assumed, middle-aged and capable-looking, with flour on her apron and concern in her eyes. "Oh, my Lord," she breathed. "What happened?" "Found them on the prairie," Jack repeated. He was starting to shake now that the ride was over, adrenaline draining away and leaving only exhaustion. Maybe 15 miles northwest. The woman was unconscious. The baby was crying. I brought them as fast as I could. "You did right." Dr. Hennessy handed the baby to his wife. "Sarah, she needs goat's milk, warmed and just a little at first. Her stomach won't handle much. Use the eyedropper." He turned back to the woman on the bed, his hands already working, checking her pulse, her pupils, the fever burning through her skin. "Help me get her dress off. I need to see if she's bleeding internally." Jack hesitated. The doctor glanced up, his expression sharp. "I'm a medical man. I've seen everything. Unless you want her to die of modesty, help me." Together they worked the ruined dress off her shoulders. Underneath, her chemise was stained with sweat and old blood, and her body told the story her silence couldn't. Bruises everywhere, ribs, back, arms, thighs, a pattern of violence that made Jack's hands shake with something darker than exhaustion. "Someone did this to her," Dr. Hennessy said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Recently. Some of it. The bruises on her face and arms are fresh, maybe 3-4 days old." The doctor nodded, his mouth tight. He examined her carefully, professionally, checking for broken bones and internal bleeding. When he pulled back the chemise to expose her ribs, Jack saw the boot-shaped bruise on her left side and had to look away. "Bastard," he muttered. "Language," Dr. Hennessy said automatically, but there was no heat in it. "Though I agree with the sentiment," he covered her again, preserving what dignity he could. "She's severely dehydrated and the fever's dangerous, but I don't think anything's broken. The bleeding on her dress is mostly from superficial cuts. If we can bring the fever down and get fluids into her, she has a chance." "And the baby?" "Same. If Sarah can get milk into her and keep her warm, she'll pull through. They're both fighters, or they wouldn't have lasted this long." Jack sagged against the wall, feeling the full weight of the day settle onto his shoulders. His legs trembled. His chest felt tight. He realized distantly that he'd been holding his breath for hours. "You should sit down," Dr. Hennessy said, not unkindly. "Before you fall down." "I'm fine." "You're not. You're sunburned, dehydrated, and in shock. When's the last time you ate?" Jack tried to remember. Yesterday? The day before? Time had gotten strange out on the prairie. "That's what I thought." The doctor pointed to a chair. "Sit. Sarah will bring you water and food. You're no good to anyone if you collapse." Jack wanted to argue, but his body betrayed him. His knees buckled, and he sank into the chair more than sat in it. Dr. Hennessy moved to a cabinet and returned with a glass of water. Jack drank it in 3 long swallows, the coolness shocking against his parched throat. "Thank you," he managed. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of the woods." The doctor turned back to his patient, washing her face and arms with cool water, trying to coax the fever down. "Do you know her name?" "No. I just found them." "No belongings? No papers?" "Nothing. Just her and the baby and the clothes on their backs." Dr. Hennessy was silent for a moment, his hands still moving with practiced efficiency. "Someone will be looking for her." "I know. If she was running from what those bruises suggest, that someone might not have her best interests at heart." "I know that too." Their eyes met over the unconscious woman, an understanding passing between them that needed no words. Whatever came next, whoever came looking, they'd deal with it, but first they'd save her life. Sarah returned with the baby, who was making weak sucking sounds around the eyedropper. "She's taking the milk," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. "Slowly, but she's taking it. Keep at it, little and often." Dr. Hennessy gestured to Jack. "Sarah, this is—" "Jack Rowan." Mr. Rowan saved their lives. Can you bring him some supper and find him a shirt? I suspect his is currently serving as a baby blanket. Sarah smiled despite the circumstances. I'll get my son's. He's about your size, Mr. Rowan. She paused, looking at the baby in her arms, then at the woman on the bed. Do we know their names? Not yet. Well, Sarah shifted the baby to her shoulder, patting her back gently. Until we do, I suppose we'll have to call them something. Miracles, perhaps. Because that's what this is. That you found them. That you got them here. That they're still breathing. Jack looked at the woman on the bed, her face still deathly pale, her breathing still too fast and shallow, but alive, fighting, holding on. Then at the baby, her tiny fist wrapped around Sarah's finger, her eyes closed, but her mouth still working at the phantom comfort of milk. Maybe, he said softly, maybe that's what they are. The night deepened outside. Dr. Hennessy worked tirelessly, changing cool compresses, monitoring vitals, administering what medicines he had. Sarah alternated between feeding the baby and bringing Jack food he could barely taste. He ate because she insisted, drank because his body demanded it, but his attention never left the woman on the bed. Around midnight, her eyes opened. They were brown, dark, and deep, filled with confusion and fear. They moved around the room, taking in the unfamiliar ceiling, the lamplight, the strange faces. Then they found Jack, and something flickered there. Recognition? No, something else, assessment perhaps, the calculation of whether he was threat or salvation. You're safe, Jack said, before the doctor could speak. He didn't know why those were the first words he chose, only that they felt necessary. You're in Willow Creek. This is Dr. Hennessy. You've been very sick, but you're safe now. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Dr. Hennessy was already there, lifting her head, bringing a cup of water to her mouth. Slowly, he murmured. Just sips. She drank, her throat working, and some color returned to her face. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, rough with disuse and fever. My baby. She's fine, Sarah said immediately, moving into view with the infant cradled against her chest. She's fed and warm and sleeping. See? The woman's eyes filled with tears. She reached out with a trembling hand, touching the baby's head with infinite gentleness. The relief on her face was so profound it hurt to witness. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Don't thank us yet, Dr. Hennessy said. You're still very weak. Can you tell us your name? The woman's gaze shifted, moving from the doctor to Sarah to Jack. Something shuddered in her expression, a wall going up behind her eyes. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger, but careful. Elena, my name is Elena Marsh, and my daughter is Mia. Elena, Dr. Hennessy nodded. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to be honest with me. Can you do that? Pause, then, barely perceptibly, a nod. How did you end up on the prairie? Were you traveling? Did your wagon break down? I was walking. Walking? From where? Another pause, longer this time. Jack could see the calculation happening, the weighing of truth against consequence. From hell, Elena said finally, and there was such flat certainty in her voice that no one questioned it. I was walking from hell, and I didn't think I'd make it out alive. The room fell silent except for the baby's soft breathing and the tick of the clock on the mantel. Dr. Hennessy exchanged a glance with his wife, then with Jack. Well, the doctor said carefully, you made it. And you're going to keep making it because we're going to help you get strong again. All right? Why? The question was sharp, suspicious. You don't know me. Don't have to. This came from Jack, surprising himself. All three of them looked at him. He met Elena's gaze steadily. Out here, you help people who need helping. That's all there is to it. And if someone comes looking for me? The question hung in the air like smoke. Jack straightened in his chair, something hardening in his chest. Then they'll have to go through us first. Elena stared at him for a long moment, those dark eyes searching his face for the lie, the ulterior motive, the betrayal she'd clearly learned to expect. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied something because she closed her eyes and let her head fall back against the pillow. My husband, she whispered. His name is Robert Marsh. If he comes here, You have to promise me something. What? Don't let him take Mia. No matter what he says, no matter what papers he has, don't let him take my daughter. The desperation in her voice made the hair on Jack's neck stand up. He looked at the baby sleeping peacefully in Sarah's arms, then at the battered woman on the bed, and felt something click into place inside him, a decision made before he'd even realized he was making it. I promise, he said, he won't touch her. Elena's eyes opened again, searching his face one more time. Then, seemingly satisfied, she let herself drift back into fevered sleep. Dr. Hennessy stood gesturing for Jack to follow him into the hallway. When they were out of Elena's earshot, the doctor spoke quietly. You shouldn't make promises you can't keep. I intend to keep it. A husband has legal rights. If this Robert Marsh shows up with a marriage certificate and demands his wife and child, there's not much we can do to stop him. Then we'll find something to do, Jack said flatly. You saw those bruises. You know what he did to her. I suspect. But suspicion isn't evidence, and evidence isn't always enough. The law favors men like him. Then the law's wrong. But Hennessy smiled without humor. Welcome to the Dakota Territory, Mr. Rowan, where the law is often wrong and good intentions get people killed. He clapped Jack on the shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. But I respect your conviction, and for what it's worth, if he does show up, I'll stand with you. Sarah, too. We don't hold with wife-beaters, legal rights, or no. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do next. But Jack knew sleep wouldn't come easy. He returned to the room, settling back into the chair, and watched Elena and Mia through the long hours of the night. Outside, the prairie wind whispered against the windows, carrying with it the scent of sage and distance, and all the danger that was surely coming their way. He'd made a promise. Now he'd have to figure out how to keep it. The first light of dawn was breaking over Willow Creek when Elena's fever finally broke, her breathing easing into something closer to natural sleep. The baby stirred, mewling softly, and Sarah prepared another careful feeding. Jack stood, stretching muscles that had locked into position during the long vigil. Dr. Hennessy appeared in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee. He offered it to Jack without a word. Jack took it gratefully, letting the heat seep into his hands. She'll live, the doctor said. They both will, thanks to you. I just brought them in. You did more than that. You gave them a chance. Hennessy paused, considering his next words carefully. What are your plans now, Mr. Rowan? I assume you were passing through when you found them? Jack had been asking himself the same question all night. He'd been riding toward Willow Creek to collect wages and move on. The pattern of his entire adult life. Never staying, never settling, never letting anyone or anything become important enough to lose. But something had changed out there on the prairie. Maybe it was the weight of that baby against his chest, or the trust in Elena's eyes when he'd promised to protect her daughter. Maybe it was just that he'd spent 20 years running from everything, and he was tired. I'm staying, he heard himself say, at least until they're on their feet. And then? Jack looked at Elena sleeping peacefully for the first time in probably weeks, at the baby content in Sarah's arms, at the life he'd saved without meaning to and couldn't quite bring himself to walk away from. I don't know, he admitted. But I made a promise, and I keep my promises. Dr. Hennessy nodded slowly, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Well then, I suppose we'd better prepare for whatever comes next. Outside, the prairie wind shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of hoofbeats and the scent of dust and leather and coming trouble. Jack set down his coffee cup and moved to the window, his hand resting unconsciously on the grip of the Colt at his hip. Whatever was coming, he'd be ready. He'd promised. The hoofbeats Jack heard that dawn didn't belong to Robert Marsh, not yet. They belonged to the ranch hands from the Circle K, riding into town for supplies and gossip, their laughter carrying through the morning air like it always did. But Jack's hand didn't leave his gun until they'd passed, and the tension in his shoulders didn't ease even then. Elena slept through the morning, her body finally claiming the rest it desperately needed. Mia woke every few hours, hungry and increasingly vocal about it, and Sarah Hennessy moved through the house with the practiced efficiency of a woman who'd raised 4 children of her own. She showed Jack how to hold the baby properly, how to support her head, how to test the milk temperature against his wrist. "You're a natural," Sarah said, watching him feed Mia with the eyedropper, his large hands surprisingly gentle around the tiny glass tube. "Don't know about that." But he didn't pull away when Mia's fingers wrapped around his thumb, holding on with surprising strength for something so small. "Children know," Sarah said. "They know who's safe and who isn't. She trusts you." Jack looked down at the baby, at those dark blue eyes watching him with what might have been curiosity or might have been infant wisdom. He'd never thought about children, had actively avoided thinking about them. They represented permanence, responsibility, all the things he'd spent his life refusing. But holding Mia, feeling the weight of her absolute dependence, something shifted in his chest that he didn't have words for. Dr. Hennessy appeared in the doorway, his medical bag in hand. "I need to make rounds. Old Mrs. Patterson's rheumatism is acting up, and the Miller boy broke his arm yesterday trying to ride that demon horse of his." He paused, looking at Jack. "You'll stay with them?" "I will." "Good. Don't let her get out of bed no matter what she says. Her body's been through hell and needs time to heal." He lowered his voice. "And if anyone comes asking questions about strangers in town, you don't know anything. Understood?" Jack nodded. The doctor left, and Sarah returned to the kitchen to prepare beef broth for Elena. Jack sat in the chair beside the bed, Mia sleeping against his chest, and waited. Elena woke near noon, her eyes clearer than they'd been the night before. She looked around the room, then at Jack, then at the baby in his arms. Something complicated crossed her face. Relief, fear, shame, gratitude, all tangled together. "She's eating well," Jack said quietly, "getting stronger." "Thank you." Elena's voice was still hoarse, but stronger. "For everything. I don't even know your name." "Jack Rowan." "Mr. Rowan." She started to sit up, then gasped, her hand going to her ribs. "Easy." Jack was on his feet immediately, Mia still cradled carefully in one arm. "Doctor said you need to rest." "I've rested long enough." But she stayed where she was, her face pale with pain. "How long have I been here?" "About 18 hours. You collapsed yesterday afternoon. I found you on the prairie and brought you in." Elena's eyes searched his face, looking for something. "Why?" The question caught him off guard. "Why what? Why did you stop? Why did you help us? Men don't—" She trailed off, looking away. "Men don't help, not without wanting something." Jack heard the history in those words, the education Robert Marsh had provided. He chose his next words carefully. "I heard your baby crying, that's all. I heard her, and I couldn't ride past. Most men would have. Maybe, but I'm not most men." Elena studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if he'd passed some test he hadn't known he was taking. "No, I don't think you are." Sarah appeared with the broth, and the conversation shifted to practical matters, getting Elena to eat, checking her fever, changing the dressing on the cuts that had scabbed over during the night. Jack excused himself to the porch, giving Elena privacy and himself space to think. The town was coming alive in the afternoon heat. Wagons rolled down the main street, kicking up dust. Women with parasols walked between the dry goods store and the butcher shop. Children chased a dog between buildings, their laughter high and bright. It looked peaceful, normal, safe. But Jack had been in enough towns to know that peace was often an illusion, and safety was something you had to fight for. He was rolling a cigarette when a man approached the porch, mid-40s, wearing a sheriff's star, his face weathered but kind. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, thumbs hooked in his gun belt. "Afternoon. You'd be Jack Rowan?" Jack's hand drifted toward his Colt, then stopped. The sheriff noticed but didn't react. "That's right. Name's Tom Brennan. I'm the law in Willow Creek." He nodded toward the house. "Doc Hennessy mentioned you brought in a woman and child yesterday. Found them on the prairie?" "That's right." "Mind telling me where exactly?" Jack described the location as best he could. The shallow depression, the distance from town, the landmarks he'd used to navigate. Brennan listened carefully, his expression neutral. That's a good 15 miles out. Long way for a woman on foot, especially with a baby. Yes, sir. She say where she came from? Haven't asked. Brennan's eyebrows rose slightly. Haven't asked, or she hasn't said? Both. The sheriff was quiet for a moment, studying Jack with the same assessing look Elena had given him earlier. You planning on staying in Willow Creek, Mr. Rowan? For now. And what's your business here? Collecting wages from a cattle drive, and making sure that woman and her baby are all right. Noble of you. There was no sarcasm in Brennan's voice, just observation. But nobility can be expensive in these parts. Woman like that, running from something, could be her problems become your problems real quick. I can handle my own problems. I don't doubt it. I'm just saying, sometimes helping people means stepping into fights that aren't yours. Brennan shifted his weight, his hand resting on his gun belt in a gesture that was habit, not threat. I've been sheriff here for 12 years. I've seen a lot of women running from bad situations, and I've seen a lot of men who think they can save them. Usually ends poorly for everyone involved. Sounds like you're advising me to walk away. I'm advising you to be careful. And I'm letting you know that if there's trouble coming, I need to know about it before it arrives. Willow Creek's a peaceful town. I'd like to keep it that way. Jack met the sheriff's gaze steadily. If trouble comes, you'll be the first to know. Appreciate that. Brennan tipped his hat. Welcome to Willow Creek, Mr. Rowan. Hope you find what you're looking for here. He walked away, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Jack watched him go, then finished rolling his cigarette and lit it, letting the smoke burn his throat. The sheriff was right. He was stepping into something that wasn't his fight. The smart thing would be to collect his wages, make sure Elena was settled, and ride on before Robert Marsh showed up. But when had he ever done the smart thing? Inside, he found Elena awake and sitting up, Mia nursing from a bottle Sarah had prepared. The sight stopped him in the doorway, mother and child. The most natural thing in the world, except for the bruises still darkening Elena's skin and the wariness in her eyes. Sheriff came by, Jack said. Elena's head snapped up, fear flooding her expression. What did you tell him? Just that I found you on the prairie. Nothing else. Did he ask about Robert? Didn't mention any names, just wanted to know if there was trouble coming to his town. Elena looked down at Mia, her hand trembling slightly as she adjusted the bottle. There is. He'll come. I don't know when, but he will. Tell me about him. Why? So you can judge me for marrying him, for staying as long as I did? So I know what we're dealing with when he shows up. The we hung in the air between them. Elena's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Rowan. You saved our lives. That's enough. You should go before he gets here. Not planning on it. Why not? The question came out almost angry. You don't know me. You don't know what I've done, I know you walked 15 miles across open prairie with a baby and whatever injuries he gave you, trying to get away from a man who beats you. I know you collapsed from fever and dehydration, but somehow kept your daughter alive. I know you're the bravest damn woman I've ever met, and I'm not leaving you to face him alone. Elena stared at him, tears finally spilling over. He'll kill you. If you get between him and what he thinks belongs to him, he'll kill you. He can try. This isn't a game, Mr. Rowan. He's not like other men. He's educated, wealthy, connected. He has friends in the territorial government. He has lawyers. And when he wants something, he gets it, no matter who he has to destroy. Jack pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, meeting Elena's eyes directly. Then tell me everything. If I'm going to fight him, I need to know what I'm fighting. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving in slow circles over Mia's back. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost detached, as if she were talking about someone else's life. I met Robert in St. Louis 3 years ago. I was working as a seamstress, living in a boarding house with 6 other girls. He came into the shop where I worked, looking for someone to alter his suits. He was handsome, educated, charming. He quoted poetry. He brought me flowers. She laughed bitterly. I thought I was the luckiest girl in the world when he asked to court me. What changed? Nothing changed. That's who he always was. I just couldn't see it until after we married. The charm was real, but it was a tool, a way to get what he wanted, and what he wanted was something he could own, control, shape into whatever he needed for his political ambitions. She shifted Mia to her shoulder, patting her back gently until the baby burped. The mundane gesture somehow made the story more terrible. The first time he hit me was 2 weeks after the wedding. I disagreed with him about something. I don't even remember what. He apologized afterward, cried, swore it would never happen again. So I forgave him. And then it happened again. And again, each time he'd apologize. Each time I'd forgive him because I didn't know what else to do. Where would I go? I had no family, no money. And he was so careful. The bruises were always where my clothes would cover them. To everyone else, we were the perfect couple. Jack felt his jaw tighten but stayed silent, letting her talk. When I got pregnant with Mia, I thought maybe it would get better. Maybe having a child would soften him. Instead, it got worse. He didn't want a daughter. He wanted a son to carry on his name. When Mia was born, he looked at her like she was a failure. My failure. Her voice broke. And the beatings got worse. More frequent, more violent. I started planning to leave, hiding money, gathering what I'd need, and then 2 weeks ago I finally ran. What made you run then? Elena's face went hard, her eyes distant. He came home drunk and angry because some business deal had fallen through. He blamed me, said I'd embarrassed him at some social function, made him look weak. He beat me worse than he ever had before. And when Mia started crying, She stopped, her whole body trembling. Jack waited, his hands clenched into fists. He picked her up and threw her. My 4-month-old baby, and he threw her across the room like she was nothing. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. She hit the wall. I thought she was dead, but she cried, and I knew if I didn't get her away from him that night, he would kill her. Maybe not that night, but eventually. So I waited until he passed out, and I took what little money I'd hidden, and I ran. How did you end up on the prairie? I got as far as the town of Deedridge, about 20 miles east of here. I was trying to buy a stagecoach ticket when someone recognized me. Robert had put out a notice offering a reward for information. The man who recognized me, he sent a telegram. Robert came with 3 of his men. They found me at the boarding house where I was staying. I barely got out the back window. I ran into the grassland because there was nowhere else to go, and I kept running until I couldn't run anymore. Jack stood, pacing to the window, trying to control the rage building in his chest. He'd killed men before, in the war, in range disputes, in bar fights that turned deadly. But he'd never wanted to kill someone like he wanted to kill Robert Marsh right now. Where is he now? Jack asked, his voice carefully controlled. I don't know, but he won't stop looking. He'll see it as a matter of pride. And when he finds me, if he finds you, he'll have to go through me. You keep saying that like it matters, like one man can stop him. Jack turned from the window, and whatever Elena saw in his face made her breath catch. I'm not just one man, Mrs. Marsh. I'm one man who's decided you and your daughter are worth protecting. And I've been underestimated my whole life, usually by men like your husband. It never ends well for them. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah poked her head in, her expression troubled. Jack, there's a man at the door asking about a missing woman and child. Says his wife ran away and he's been tracking her across the territory. Elena went white. Oh God, he's here. Stay calm, Jack said. He looked at Sarah. Keep them in here. Lock the door. Don't open it unless it's me or the doctor. What are you going to do? Have a conversation. Jack walked through the house with measured steps, letting his anger settle into something cold and focused. He opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, closing it behind him. The man standing in the street was exactly what Jack expected. Mid-30s, well-dressed in a tailored suit despite the heat, his face handsome in a way that probably made him popular with women who didn't know better. 2 men flanked him, both armed, both with the hard look of hired muscle. Good afternoon, the man said, his voice smooth and cultured. I'm looking for Dr. Hennessy. I understand he may have treated a woman and infant who arrived yesterday. Doctor's making rounds, won't be back till evening. I see. And you are? Nobody who matters to you. The man's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. I appreciate discretion, Mr. Rowan. Mr. Rowan. I'm Robert Marsh. I'm looking for my wife, Elena, and our daughter. I have reason to believe they may have passed through this town. Have you seen them? Jack leaned against the porch rail, his hand casually near his gun. What makes you think they'd be here? A witness in Deedridge reported seeing a woman matching Elena's description heading west with an infant. This is the nearest settlement in that direction. Simple logic. Robert's tone was patient, reasonable, the voice of a man explaining something obvious to someone slow. She's been ill, mentally unwell. She ran away from home without her medicine. I'm very worried about her and the baby. That's so. It is. Elena has always been fragile. The birth was difficult, and afterward, well, she hasn't been herself. I've been searching for nearly 2 weeks now. You can imagine my concern. Jack could see the performance for what it was, the worried husband, reasonable and sympathetic, making sure any witnesses would remember him as the victim. It was practiced, polished, probably used before. If I see a woman and baby, I'll let the sheriff know, Jack said. I'd appreciate if you let me know directly. I'm staying at the hotel. Robert pulled a card from his pocket and held it out. When Jack didn't move to take it, he laid it on the porch rail. There's a substantial reward for information leading to their safe return. $500. Generous. My family is everything to me, Mr. Rowan. I just want them home safe. I'm sure you do. Something in Jack's tone made Robert's eyes narrow slightly, the mask slipping just enough to show what lived underneath. You seem skeptical of my concern. Seem that way? If you know something about my wife's whereabouts and you're withholding that information, I should inform you that's a crime. Interfering with a husband's legal rights to his family is a serious matter. So is beating a woman unconscious and throwing a baby against a wall. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Robert's expression went very still, very cold. His two men shifted, hands moving toward their guns. That's quite an accusation, Robert said softly. Do you have proof of such claims? Don't need proof to know what kind of man I'm looking at. And what kind is that? The kind who hides behind law and money and hired guns because without them, you're nothing. The kind who thinks owning a marriage certificate means owning a person. The kind who beats women and babies and calls it discipline. Robert's smile was gone now, replaced by something ugly. You're making a very serious mistake, Mr. Rowan. Wouldn't be my first. I have friends in the territorial government. I have lawyers. I have resources you can't imagine. If you're sheltering my wife, I will have you arrested and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. You're welcome to try. This isn't a game. Elena is my legal wife. The child is my legal daughter. You have no right to keep them from me. Funny thing about rights, Jack said. Sometimes they run up against what's decent and what's right, and the law doesn't always come out on top. Robert took a step forward, his voice dropping. I will get them back, whether through legal means or other methods, and anyone who stands in my way will regret it. Are we clear? Crystal, are you done? For a moment, Jack thought Robert might try something, might signal his men to draw, might push this into violence right here in the street. But Robert was too smart for that. Too calculating. He'd want witnesses on his side when things turned bloody. We'll speak again, Robert said. He turned and walked toward the hotel, his men following. Halfway across the street, he stopped and looked back. By the way, Mr. Rowan, I know who you are. Jack Rowan, formerly of the 5th Colorado Cavalry. Dishonorably discharged after a court-martial for insubordination. Wanted in 2 territories for assault. You really think you are in a position to judge anyone's character? Jack didn't flinch. Takes one to know one, I suppose. Robert smiled without warmth. Indeed. Good day, Mr. Rowan. Enjoy what little time you have left in this town. Jack watched them go, his heart hammering, but his expression calm. When they disappeared into the hotel, he went back inside and found Sarah standing in the hallway, her face pale. He's going to make trouble, she said. Already has. What are we going to do? Fight him. But first I need to talk to your husband and the sheriff. If Robert has the law on his side, we need to even the odds. Elena appeared in the doorway of the bedroom. Mia clutched against her chest. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide with fear. You shouldn't have challenged him like that. Now he knows you're protecting us. He'll come after you. Let him. Jack. She stopped, seeming to realize she'd used his first name. Mr. Rowan, please, just tell him where I am. Give him what he wants. I can't have your death on my conscience, too. Jack crossed to her in 3 strides, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Listen to me. I meant what I said. He's not taking you. He's not taking Mia. And I don't give a damn what the law says, or what friends he has, or what he knows about my past. You understand? Tears ran down Elena's face. Why? Why would you do this for us? Because somebody should have done it a long time ago. Because you deserve better than what you've had. Because that baby deserves to grow up knowing her mother fought for her, and people stood beside her when it mattered. He paused, his voice softening. And because I heard her crying out on that prairie, and when I picked her up, she grabbed my thumb and held on like I mattered, like I was worth holding on to. Nobody's done that in 20 years, Mrs. Marsh. So maybe I'm doing this for selfish reasons after all. Elena sobbed once, then pressed her hand over her mouth, muffling the sound. She nodded, unable to speak. Get some rest, Jack said. Tomorrow we figure out how to keep you safe. Tonight, I'm going to make sure that hotel burns down if he tries to leave it. Sarah gasped. Jack! Figure of speech. Mostly. Jack headed for the door. I'm going to find the sheriff and Doc. Don't open this door for anyone but us. He stepped out into the afternoon sun, feeling the weight of what he'd just committed to settling onto his shoulders. Robert Marsh wasn't some drunk cowhand or petty criminal. He was educated, connected, dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with guns. Fighting him would require more than courage. It would require strategy. Good thing Jack had learned long ago that sometimes the underdog wins, not because they're stronger, but because they have more to lose. Jack found Sheriff Brennan at the jailhouse, feet propped on his desk, reading a 3-day-old newspaper. The sheriff looked up when Jack entered, unsurprised, as if he'd been expecting this visit. That was quick, Brennan said, folding the paper. Man's been in town less than 2 hours, and you're already at my door. That some kind of record? Robert Marsh is here. Came to the doctor's house looking for his wife. And you told him what exactly? That I'd let you know if I saw anything. Brennan's mouth twitched. Diplomatic of you. What did he tell you? That his wife is mentally ill, ran away without her medicine, and he's the concerned husband just trying to bring his family home safe. You believe him? About as much as I believe a rattlesnake's trying to keep me warm when it crawls into my bedroll. The sheriff was quiet for a moment, studying Jack with those sharp, assessing eyes. You want to tell me what you know that I don't? Jack hesitated. Telling Brennan everything meant trusting a man he'd known for less than a day, gambling that the law would side with justice over legality. But keeping quiet meant fighting Robert Marsh alone, and alone wasn't a position Jack wanted to be in. Elena Marsh told me her husband beat her regularly. 2 weeks ago, he threw their 4-month-old baby against a wall. That's why she ran. That's why I found her half dead on the prairie. She was running for her life and her daughter's life. Brennan's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. She willing to testify to that? If it comes to it. And you've seen evidence? Bruises? Injuries? Enough to know she's not lying. Doc Hennessy saw them too. The sheriff stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the street where afternoon shadows were starting to lengthen. Here's the problem, Rowan. Even if everything you're saying is true, and I'm inclined to believe it is, the law doesn't care much about what happens between a man and his wife. Marriage is a legal contract. She belongs to him in the eyes of the law, and so does the child. That's not right. No, it's not. But it's legal. And my job is to enforce the law, not rewrite it. Jack felt frustration building in his chest. So you're saying there's nothing you can do? I'm saying there's not much I can do officially. If he shows up with a court order demanding his wife and child, I have to enforce it. That's the job. Brennan turned from the window and his expression was grim. Unofficially? I've seen my share of wife beaters. I've buried 2 women in this county who died from their husband's discipline. If Elena Marsh says she's in danger, I believe her, but belief doesn't change the law. Then what good are you? The words came out sharper than Jack intended. Brennan didn't take offense, just smiled without humor. The good I am is this. I enforce the law fairly, which means if Robert Marsh steps out of line even a little, I come down on him like the wrath of heaven. And it means if you do something that might technically be illegal but serves justice, I might be slow to notice. Understand? Jack understood perfectly. The sheriff was offering him room to maneuver, as long as he didn't force Brennan to choose between his conscience and his badge. I understand. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Marsh mentioned he has friends in the territorial government. If he's connected as he claims, he could have a court order here within days. And when that happens, my hands are tied. Brennan paused. Unless there's another legal option we haven't considered. Like what? Well, the sheriff leaned against his desk, arms crossed. Husband has legal claim to his wife and child. But if she wasn't his wife anymore, that claim disappears. Divorce? Rare but possible. Takes time, though, and money for lawyers. Time we probably don't have. Then what are you suggesting? Brennan met Jack's eyes directly. If Elena Marsh was married to someone else, Robert Marsh's legal claim ends. Can't claim a wife who isn't your wife. The implication hit Jack like a punch. You're suggesting I marry her? I'm suggesting it's an option, probably the only legal option that protects her and the child from him. Brennan held up a hand before Jack could respond. I know it's drastic. I know you barely know the woman. But if Marsh gets a court order, this might be the only way to stop him legally. Jack's mind reeled. Marriage. The word alone had always made him want to ride in the opposite direction. Marriage meant permanence, commitment, all the things he'd avoided his entire adult life. But it also meant protection for Elena and Mia, a legal shield that even Robert Marsh's lawyers couldn't easily break. How would that even work? Jack asked. She's already married. Technically, but if she swears her first marriage was never consummated, or that she was coerced, or that the marriage was invalid for any number of reasons, a circuit judge might annul it. Then she'd be free to marry someone else. Brennan shrugged. It's not perfect, and a good lawyer could challenge it. But it would buy time. And it would make Marsh's legal position a hell of a lot weaker. You know a judge who'd do that? Judge Catherine Miller's circuit includes Willow Creek. She's due here in 3 days for the monthly court session. And between you and me, she doesn't have much patience for men who abuse women. If Elena tells her story, Catherine might be willing to grant an emergency annulment. Jack walked to the window, looking out at the town that had somehow become the battlefield where he'd make his stand. 3 days. That's all the time they had before the judge arrived, and probably about the same time it would take for Robert Marsh to get his court order. I need to think about this, Jack said finally. Don't think too long. Marsh isn't going to sit idle. Jack returned to the doctor's house as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded him of fire. Sarah met him at the door, her expression worried. Elena's asking for you. She's been anxious since you left. He found Elena in the bedroom, sitting up in bed with Mia sleeping in her arms. She looked stronger than she had that morning. The fever had broken completely, and some color had returned to her face, but her eyes were haunted. He's still here, isn't he? She asked. At the hotel, probably planning his next move. Did you talk to the sheriff? Jack pulled the chair close to the bed and sat, trying to figure out how to explain what Brennan had suggested. I did. He wants to help, but his hands are tied by the law. If Robert gets a court order, he will. Robert always gets what he wants. Maybe not this time. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The sheriff suggested something, a way to protect you legally that Marsh can't fight. What way? Jack took a breath. Marriage. If you were married to someone else, Robert's legal claim to you would end. He couldn't force you back. Elena stared at him. Married to who? To me. The silence stretched between them. Mia stirred in Elena's arms, making small sleeping sounds. Outside, someone laughed, the sound distant and incongruous. That's insane, Elena said finally. Probably. We don't even know each other. True. Marriage it's forever. It's not something you do just to solve a legal problem. In theory, but we could get it annulled later once you're safe, once Robert's given up and gone back to wherever he came from. Jack met her eyes. It would just be on paper, a legal strategy, nothing more. Elena looked down at Mia, her hand moving in gentle circles over the baby's back. When she spoke, her voice was small. I swore I'd never let another man have that kind of power over me again. I wouldn't have power over you, I mean. Jack struggled for the right words. It would be your choice, Elena, all of it. Where you live, what you do, how you raise your daughter. I'd just be a name on a piece of paper standing between you and him. Why would you do that? Marry a woman you don't love? Raise a child that isn't yours, all for people you met 2 days ago? It was the same question she'd asked before, in different words. Why help? Why care? Why risk everything for strangers? Jack didn't have a good answer, or at least not one that made sense when said aloud. I told you, I heard your baby crying and I couldn't ride past. Maybe this is the same thing. I see something that needs doing and I can't walk away from it. That's not a reason to marry someone. No, it's not. But it might be a reason to help them. Jack paused. Look, I'm not saying you have to decide right now. The judge won't be here for 3 days. That gives you time to think, to decide if this is something you want to do. But if Robert gets a court order before then, we'd have no choice. Right. Elena was quiet for a long time, her gaze distant. Jack watched emotions play across her face, fear, hope, doubt, calculation. Finally, she looked at him directly. If I agreed to this, what would you want in return? Nothing. Everyone wants something, Mr. Rowan. Robert taught me that lesson well. Then maybe I'm teaching you a different lesson, that some people help because it's right, not because they want payment. You're either a saint or a fool. Probably a fool. But I'm a fool who keeps his promises, and I promise to keep you and Mia safe. This seems like the best way to do that. Elena looked at him for another long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking. He stood to leave, but Elena's voice stopped him at the door. Jack? She'd used his first name again, and it sounded different in her mouth, softer, more personal. Thank you for everything. Whatever I decide, I want you to know. What you've done for us, it matters. More than you know. Get some rest. We'll figure this out. Jack stepped onto the porch and found Dr. Hennessy sitting on the steps, smoking a pipe. The doctor gestured for Jack to join him. Sarah told me about the sheriff's suggestion, Hennessy said. You're actually considering it? Might be the only way to keep them safe legally. Marriage is a serious commitment, Jack. Even a marriage of convenience. I know. Do you? The doctor turned to look at him. Because from where I'm sitting, you're a man who's spent his whole life avoiding roots, and now you're talking about marrying a woman and taking on a child. That's not a small thing. Didn't say it was small, said it was necessary. Hennessy drew on his pipe, exhaling smoke that drifted into the darkening sky. I've known you 2 days, but I've seen enough to get a measure of you. You're a good man, Jack Rowan, whatever your past might be. But good intentions aren't always enough. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you go through with this, Elena and that baby are going to depend on you. Not just for a few days or weeks, but potentially for years. Even if the marriage is annulled eventually, you'll be part of their lives. Are you ready for that kind of responsibility? Jack had been asking himself the same question since Brennan made the suggestion. Was he ready? Could he be the kind of man Elena and Mia needed? He'd spent 20 years proving he wasn't reliable, wasn't worth depending on. How could he suddenly change that? But then he thought about Mia's tiny hand wrapped around his thumb, about the trust in Elena's eyes when he promised to protect them, about the weight of purpose he'd felt for the first time in years. I don't know if I'm ready, Jack admitted, but I'm willing to try. That has to count for something. Hennessy nodded slowly. It does. Just remember, once you start down this path, there's no easy way back. You'll have made yourself part of their story, and they'll be part of yours. Make sure that's what you want before you take vows, even temporary ones. I will. The doctor stood, tapping his pipe out against the porch rail. I'm going to check on my patients. You should eat something and get some sleep. Tomorrow's likely to be complicated. Jack remained on his porch as darkness fell, watching the town settle into night. Lights appeared in windows, warm and yellow. Somewhere down the street, a piano played a melody he almost recognized. It looked peaceful, safe, normal. But Jack knew that peace was fragile, and safety was an illusion that could shatter with one court order or one violent man's determination. He was still sitting there when footsteps approached from the darkness. Jack's hand moved to his gun before he recognized Sheriff Brennan's silhouette. "Thought I'd find you here," Brennan said, climbing the steps. "Couldn't sleep?" "Too much to think about." "I expect so." The sheriff leaned against the porch rail. "I sent a telegram to the territorial marshal's office, asking about Robert Marsh. Got a reply an hour ago." "And?" "He's exactly who he claims to be. Wealthy family in St. Louis, connections to the territorial governor, owns several businesses across the plains. Also has a reputation for getting what he wants, one way or another." Brennan paused. "But here's the interesting part. This isn't the first time his wife has run away." Jack's head snapped up. "What?" 5 years ago, he was married to a woman named Catherine, different Catherine from the judge. She disappeared one night, just vanished. Marsh claimed she'd run off with another man, but no body was ever found, no trace of her. Most people assumed she was dead, either by his hand or by accident while running. "You think he killed her?" "Can't prove it, but it's interesting timing, don't you think? First wife disappears, second wife runs away with injuries consistent with severe abuse. Pattern starts to emerge." Jack felt ice settle in his stomach. "Elena and Mia aren't safe, are they? Even if we win legally, he'll find a way." "Men like Marsh usually do." Brennan's voice was grim. "Which is why I wanted to tell you this. If you marry Elena, you're not just protecting her from a legal claim. You're putting yourself between her and a man who's possibly already killed one wife. You need to know what you're getting into." "I appreciate the warning." "It's not a warning, it's a fact. And here's another fact. If Marsh tries something violent, I can arrest him. But if he's smart, he'll use the law as a weapon until he gets what he wants. And once he gets it..." Brennan let the sentence hang. Jack understood what the sheriff wasn't saying. Once Robert had legal custody of Elena and Mia, whatever happened to them afterward would be beyond the law's reach. A woman could die a dozen ways in frontier territory, and a husband's word was usually enough to avoid investigation. "Then we make sure he doesn't get that custody," Jack said. "How?" "The marriage. If Judge Miller grants the annulment and recognizes my marriage to Elena, Marsh loses his legal claim. He can't force her back if she's married to someone else. He'll fight it. His lawyers will challenge the annulment, claim the second marriage is fraudulent. Let them. Every day they spend in court is another day Elena and Mia are safe." Brennan smiled grimly. "You're thinking like a tactician. Good. You'll need that." He pushed off from the rail. "Judge Miller arrives in 3 days. I'll make sure she hears Elena's case first thing. In the meantime, keep them safe and keep Marsh at a distance. Don't give him any excuse to claim you've kidnapped his wife or interfered with his rights." "What about his men? The 2 who came with him?" "I've been asking around. They're hired guns out of Denver, professional muscle. As long as Marsh is paying them, they'll do whatever he says. But they're smart enough not to start trouble with a lawman watching. Probably." Jack didn't like the uncertainty in that last word. "You think they'll try something?" "If Marsh gets desperate enough, yes. Men like him don't handle rejection well, especially when it's public. Elena running away, you protecting her, the whole town knowing his business, that's humiliation. And humiliated men do stupid, violent things." After Brennan left, Jack finally went inside and accepted the plate of food Sarah had kept warm for him. He ate mechanically, tasting nothing, his mind working through scenarios and possibilities. 3 days until the judge arrived. 3 days to keep Elena and Mia safe while convincing Elena that marriage, even a marriage of convenience, was worth the risk. He was washing his plate when Elena appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl Sarah had lent her. She looked tired but determined. "Can't sleep either?" Jack asked. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him. Robert. His face when he's angry, his hands around my throat, the look in his eyes when he threw Mia." She hugged the shawl tighter. "I keep thinking he's going to break through that door and finish what he started." "He won't get past me." "You can't stay awake forever, Jack." "No, but I can stay awake tonight." Elena was quiet for a moment, then moved to the table and sat down. "I've been thinking about your proposal. The marriage." Jack set down the plate and turned to face her. "And?" "I want to understand what it would mean, not just legally, but practically. If we did this, if I agreed, What would you expect from me? Nothing you aren't willing to give. That's not an answer. Jack pulled out a chair and sat across from her, trying to find words for something he'd never had to explain before. I'm not your husband, Elena, not in any real sense. If we do this, it's a legal arrangement to keep you safe. You'd have your own life, make your own choices. I wouldn't expect you to... He paused, searching for delicate phrasing. To be a wife in any traditional sense. And Mia? I'd protect her like she was my own. But you're her mother. You make the decisions about how she's raised, what she's taught, all of it. I'd just be there to keep her safe. From Robert. From anyone who tried to hurt her. Elena's eyes filled with tears. And when it's over? When Robert gives up or the annulment is final and we can separate, would you resent me? Would you feel like I'd used you? No. How can you be so sure? Because I'm walking into this with my eyes open. I know what it is and what it isn't, and if it helps keep you and Mia alive, that's enough. Elena wiped at her eyes with the shawl. You're a strange man, Jack Rowan. I don't know if I've ever met anyone like you. Is that good or bad? I haven't decided yet. She managed a small smile. But I think I want to do this. The marriage. If Judge Miller will grant the annulment, if it's really possible, I want to try. Jack felt relief and apprehension in equal measure. You're sure? No. But I'm sure I don't want to go back to Robert. And I'm sure you're the only person who's offered to help without asking for something in return. That has to mean something. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. Thank you, Jack, for giving us a chance. He turned his hand over, gently squeezing hers. We'll make this work. I promise. The next 2 days passed in tense waiting. Robert Marsh made no move to approach the doctor's house again, but his presence hung over the town like storm clouds. Jack saw him twice, once riding past on a fine black horse flanked by his hired men, and once standing on the hotel porch, watching the street with the patience of a predator. Sheriff Brennan kept close watch on all of them, making his presence known, reminding everyone that the law was neutral ground. Doc Hennessy tended to Elena's remaining injuries and declared her strong enough to travel if necessary. Sarah worked on altering one of her old dresses to fit Elena, creating something suitable for a court appearance. And Jack stayed close, sleeping in the doctor's front room with his gun within reach, listening to every sound in the darkness. During the day, he helped Elena practice her testimony, preparing her for the questions Judge Miller would ask. At night, he took turns with Sarah feeding Mia, learning the rhythm of a baby's needs, getting used to the weight of her in his arms. On the third day, Judge Catherine Miller arrived in Willow Creek with the morning stage. She was perhaps 50, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She set up court in the town meeting hall and sent word that she'd see petitioners starting at noon. Jack, Elena, and Sheriff Brennan were there when she opened the session. Robert Marsh was there too, sitting in the back row with his lawyers, 2 men in expensive suits who'd arrived on yesterday's stage. They watched Elena with cold calculation, making notes, whispering to their client. Judge Miller called Elena forward first. The courtroom fell silent as Elena stood, Mia in her arms, and approached the bench. Jack remained in his seat, hands clenched, watching. State your name for the record, Judge Miller said, her voice crisp and professional. Elena Marsh, Your Honor. And you're petitioning for an emergency annulment of your marriage to Robert Marsh? Yes, Your Honor. On what grounds? Elena took a breath, and Jack could see her gathering courage. On grounds of fraud and coercion, Your Honor, and on grounds that remaining married to him puts my life and my daughter's life in immediate danger. A murmur went through the courtroom. Robert Marsh half stood, but one of his lawyers pulled him back down. Judge Miller's eyes narrowed. Those are serious allegations, Mrs. Marsh. I'll need to hear your full testimony. But before we begin, she looked toward the back of the room. Mr. Robert Marsh, I assume? Robert stood, all charm and dignity. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to address these outrageous accusations. You'll have your turn, Mr. Marsh. Sit down. Judge Miller's tone brooked no argument. Robert sat, but Jack could see the fury in his eyes. The judge turned back to Elena. Mrs. Marsh, please tell me in your own words why you're seeking this annulment. And Elena, with Mia quiet in her arms and her voice steady despite the fear Jack knew she felt, began to tell her story. Elena's voice was steady at first, almost detached, as if she were recounting someone else's nightmare instead of her own. She described meeting Robert in St. Louis, the courtship that had seemed like a fairy tale, the wedding that should have been the happiest day of her life. Judge Miller listened without interruption, her face impassive but her eyes sharp, cataloging every detail. Then Elena reached the part where the fairy tale ended. "The first time he hit me was 2 weeks after we married," she said, her hand unconsciously moving to touch Mia's head, as if the baby's warmth could anchor her. "I'd suggested we visit my friend from the dress shop where I used to work. He said wives didn't need friends, only their husbands. When I disagreed, he struck me across the face hard enough to split my lip." Robert Marsh stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is complete fabrication. Mr. Marsh, I will hold you in contempt if you interrupt again." Judge Miller's voice could have frozen fire. "Sit down and be silent, or I'll have the sheriff remove you from this courtroom." Robert sat, his jaw tight, his hands clenched on his knees. His lawyers leaned in, whispering urgently, but he waved them off. Elena continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "After that first time, he apologized. He cried and swore it would never happen again. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because I had nowhere else to go. But it did happen again. And again. Always where the bruises wouldn't show, always with an apology afterward, always with a promise that this was the last time." "Did you ever seek help?" Judge Miller asked. "I tried once. I went to a minister, told him what was happening. He said marriage was a sacred bond, that my duty was to be patient and obedient, that if I prayed harder and tried harder to please my husband, the situation would improve." Elena's voice cracked slightly. "So I tried harder. I became smaller, quieter, more careful. It didn't matter. Nothing I did mattered." "When did it escalate?" "When I became pregnant. Robert wanted a son to carry on his family name. When the midwife told us I was carrying a girl, he was furious. He said it proved I was useless, that I couldn't even give him the one thing he wanted." Elena's arms tightened around Mia. When she was born, he looked at her like she was a mistake. My mistake. And the beatings got worse. Judge Miller leaned forward. "Mrs. Marsh, you mentioned in your petition that you feared for your daughter's life. Can you explain why?" Elena took a shaking breath. This was the part she'd dreaded, the part that made her wake screaming in the night. 2 weeks ago, Robert came home drunk. He'd lost money on some business deal and was looking for someone to blame. He beat me worse than he ever had before. Ribs, back, face. I thought he was going to kill me. When Mia started crying in her cradle, he told her to shut up. She didn't, because she was a baby and she didn't understand. So he picked her up and he threw her. The courtroom erupted. People gasped, someone cursed, and Robert Marsh was on his feet again, shouting denials. Judge Miller's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order! I will have order in this court," she pointed at Robert. "Mr. Marsh, one more outburst, and you will be removed. Do you understand?" Robert's face was purple with rage, but he nodded and sat. Judge Miller turned back to Elena, and for the first time, her professional mask slipped enough to show compassion. "Mrs. Marsh, did your daughter survive?" "Yes, Your Honor. She hit the wall, and I thought—" Elena's voice broke completely. Tears streamed down her face, but she kept talking. "I thought she was dead. But she cried, and I knew I had to get her away from him. That night when he passed out, I took what little money I'd hidden, and I ran." "And Mr. Marsh pursued you?" "Yes, Your Honor. He put out notices offering rewards for information about me. When someone in Dead Ridge recognized me and sent word, he came with his men. They found me at the boarding house. I barely escaped. I ran into the prairie because there was nowhere else to go, and I kept running until I couldn't run anymore. If Mr. Rowan hadn't found me, Mia and I would have died out there." Judge Miller made a note, then looked up. "Dr. Hennessy examined you when you arrived in Willow Creek?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Dr. Hennessy, please stand." The doctor rose from his seat near the front. "Did you observe injuries consistent with Mrs. Marsh's testimony?" "I did, Your Honor. Extensive bruising in various stages of healing, indicating repeated trauma over an extended period. Also evidence of recent severe beating, broken ribs, facial contusions, defensive wounds on her arms and hands. In my professional opinion, the injuries were consistent with violent assault. Thank you, Doctor. Judge Miller looked at Elena again. Mrs. Marsh, you're now petitioning to have your marriage annulled and to marry Mr. Jack Rowan. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. Why marriage rather than simply seeking legal separation or protection? Elena glanced back at Jack, then at Robert, then at the judge. Because my husband has connections, Your Honor. He has money and lawyers and friends in the territorial government. A protection order is just paper. He'll find a way around it. But if I'm married to someone else, he has no legal claim to me or my daughter. It's the only way I can think of to keep us safe. Mr. Rowan, please stand. Jack stood, feeling every eye in the courtroom on him. Judge Miller studied him with the same sharp assessment she'd given Elena. Mr. Rowan, you understand what you're proposing to do? You'd be taking legal responsibility for Mrs. Marsh and her child, potentially putting yourself in conflict with a man who has considerable resources and influence. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. And you're willing to do this why exactly? Jack had known this question would come, but he still struggled with how to answer it. The truth was complicated, tangled up in things he barely understood himself. Loneliness and purpose and a baby's hand wrapped around his thumb. And the first time in 20 years, he'd felt like he mattered. Because it's the right thing to do, Your Honor. Because Mrs. Marsh and her daughter deserve protection, and I'm able to provide it. Because I made a promise. You've known Mrs. Marsh for how long? 4 days, Your Honor. A murmur went through the courtroom again. Judge Miller raised an eyebrow. 4 days, and you're prepared to marry her? Yes, Your Honor. This isn't a romantic impulse? You're not in love with her? Jack met the judge's eyes steadily. No, Your Honor. This is a practical solution to a dangerous situation. Mrs. Marsh needs legal protection from a violent man, and marriage provides that protection. We both understand what this is and what it isn't. Judge Miller turned to Elena. Mrs. Marsh, is Mr. Rowan's characterization accurate? You understand this would be a marriage of convenience, not a love match? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rowan has been very clear about the terms. He's asking nothing from me except the opportunity to help keep my daughter and me safe. And you trust him? Elena looked at Jack again, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with the courtroom, or the law, or the performance they were putting on for the judge. Yes, Your Honor, I do. Judge Miller sat back, considering. The silence stretched until Jack wanted to break it, to say something more, to plead or argue or somehow make her understand. But he stayed quiet, letting the judge think. Finally, she spoke. Mr. Marsh's lawyers, you may present your case. The lead lawyer stood, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the confident bearing of someone who'd won most of his legal battles. Your Honor, this entire proceeding is a farce. My client's wife is clearly mentally unstable, making wild accusations without evidence. The doctor observed bruises, yes, but bruises can come from many sources. Mrs. Marsh could have sustained those injuries falling or during her reckless flight across the prairie. Are you seriously suggesting she beat herself? Judge Miller's voice was dangerously quiet. I'm suggesting there are alternative explanations that don't involve my client. As for her claims about their daughter, there were no witnesses to this alleged incident. It's her word against his, and we all know that new mothers can become irrational, even dangerous. Postpartum hysteria is a documented medical condition. Jack's hands clenched into fists. Beside him, Sheriff Brennan put a warning hand on his arm. The lawyer continued, warming to his argument. Furthermore, this proposed marriage to Mr. Rowan is clearly a scheme to defraud my client of his legal rights as a husband and father. Mr. Rowan admitted he's known Mrs. Marsh for only 4 days. No reasonable person enters into marriage after such a brief acquaintance. This is obviously a conspiracy to circumvent the law. A conspiracy to save her life, Jack said, unable to stay silent. Mr. Rowan, you're not to speak unless addressed, Judge Miller said, but there was no real censure in her tone. She looked at the lawyer. Do you have any evidence to support your claims that Mrs. Marsh is mentally unstable? Medical records, testimony from physicians who've treated her? We have testimony from my client about her erratic behavior, her mood swings, her inability to properly care for their household, so no actual medical evidence. Just your client's assertions. Judge Miller made another note. Anything else? The lawyer produced a sheaf of papers. We have a motion to immediately return Mrs. Marsh and the child to my client's custody, pending investigation of these allegations. We also have a court order from a judge in St. Louis granting Mr. Marsh emergency custodial rights based on his wife's disappearance and suspected mental instability. He approached the bench and handed the papers to Judge Miller. She read them carefully, her expression growing darker with each page. This order was issued 3 days ago, she said. Before any investigation was conducted, before Mrs. Marsh had opportunity to present her side, before any evidence was examined. The judge who signed this is Judge Harold Pemberton, correct? Yes, Your Honor. Judge Pemberton is a personal friend of the Marsh family, is he not? The lawyer hesitated. I believe they're acquainted, yes. Acquainted. Judge Miller's voice dripped with contempt. Mr. Marsh, please stand. Robert stood, smoothing his suit jacket. Even now, even here, he managed to look composed and in control. Mr. Marsh, did you have any contact with Judge Pemberton before he issued this order? I may have mentioned the situation to him in passing, Your Honor. We belong to the same club in St. Louis. I see. And did you provide Judge Pemberton with your wife's account of events? Did you inform him of the abuse allegations? There are no abuse allegations, Your Honor. There's only a mentally unstable woman making wild claims to justify abandoning her lawful husband and child. Abandoning the child? Judge Miller's eyebrows rose. The child is here, with her mother, Mr. Marsh. How exactly has Mrs. Marsh abandoned her? Robert's composure slipped slightly. I misspoke, Your Honor. I meant abandoning her responsibilities. No, I think you spoke truthfully for once. You said child, singular, as if you view the infant as separate from Mrs. Marsh, as property to be reclaimed rather than a human being in her mother's care. Judge Miller set down the papers. Here's what I see in these documents, Mr. Marsh. I see a powerful man using his connections to obtain a court order without due process. I see attempts to paint a woman fleeing for her life as mentally unstable. I see everything except actual evidence of instability or evidence that you're a fit parent. Your Honor, I must object, the lawyer began. Object all you want. This court order from Judge Pemberton has no jurisdiction in this territory. I am the presiding judge here, and I will make the determination based on evidence presented in this courtroom, not on favorable rulings from your client's friends. She looked at Elena. Mrs. Marsh, stand again, please. Elena stood, shifting Mia to her other arm. I'm going to ask you a question, and I need complete honesty. Can you provide that? Yes, Your Honor. If I deny your petition for annulment, if I order you to return to your husband, what will you do? Elena didn't hesitate. I'll run again, Your Honor. I'll take my daughter, and I'll keep running until he catches me or I die trying. Because going back to him means death. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. And I won't let Mia grow up thinking that's what love looks like. The raw honesty in her voice silenced the courtroom. Even Robert's lawyers looked uncomfortable. Judge Miller nodded slowly. That's what I thought you'd say. She turned to Robert. Mr. Marsh, I'm going to ask you the same question. If I grant this annulment and recognize a new marriage between Mrs. Marsh and Mr. Rowan, what will you do? Robert's face was stone. I'll appeal, Your Honor. I'll fight this injustice through every legal channel available. My wife belongs with me, and I will not rest until she's returned to her proper place. Her proper place. Interesting phrasing. Judge Miller stood, and the entire courtroom stood with her. I've heard enough. I'm going to take a 1-hour recess to consider my ruling. When I return, I'll announce my decision. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell, and the courtroom erupted into conversation. Jack immediately went to Elena, who was trembling despite her brave testimony. You did well, he said quietly. I don't know if it was enough. Did you see Robert's face? He's going to fight this with everything he has. Let him fight. We'll be ready. Sheriff Brennan joined them, his expression grim. That court order from St. Louis is a problem. Even if Judge Miller rules in your favor, Marsh can use it to challenge her decision. Can he override her ruling? Jack asked. Not easily, but he can make things complicated. File appeals, seek injunctions, drag this out for months. Brennan lowered his voice. And every day this drags on is another day he's hunting for a way to take them by force. Jack understood what the sheriff wasn't saying. Legal battles took time, and Robert Marsh didn't seem like a man who'd wait patiently for the law to work in his favor. They moved to a small room adjacent to the courtroom where Doc Hennessy and Sarah waited. Sarah immediately took Mia, giving Elena's arms a rest. The baby was fussy, picking up on the tension in the air. "How do you think the judge will rule?" Elena asked, looking at Brennan. "Hard to say. Catherine Miller's fair, but she's also pragmatic. She knows granting your annulment will create legal complications, maybe even political problems if Marsh makes trouble with his connections." Brennan paused. "But she's also seen enough abused women to know the truth when she hears it, and she doesn't like being manipulated by powerful men pulling strings behind the scenes." The hour passed with agonizing slowness. Elena paced, unable to sit still. Jack stood at the window, watching the street for any sign of trouble. Robert and his lawyers remained in the courtroom, their voices occasionally rising in heated discussion. Finally, a clerk appeared at the door. "Judge Miller is ready. Please return to the courtroom." They filed back in, taking their seats. Jack noticed that the courtroom had filled with townspeople during the recess. Word had spread about the hearing, and half of Willow Creek seemed to have shown up to witness the outcome. He saw the blacksmith who'd directed him to the doctor's house, several ranch hands from surrounding spreads, shopkeepers, and their wives, all watching with intense interest. Judge Miller entered, and everyone stood. She took her seat, arranged her notes, and looked out at the assembled crowd. "I've considered all the evidence and testimony presented today," she began. "This is an unusual case involving serious allegations and competing legal claims. The law is not always equipped to address situations where human decency and legal technicality are at odds. However, it is my job to interpret the law in a way that serves justice, not just legal convenience." Jack felt Elena's hand slip into his. He squeezed gently, offering what reassurance he could. "Mrs. Elena Marsh has presented credible testimony of systematic abuse by her husband, Robert Marsh. This testimony is supported by medical evidence and by the observable fact that she fled across dangerous territory rather than remain in her marriage. No woman risks death by exposure and starvation unless she's fleeing something worse." Robert Marsh shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. "Mr. Robert Marsh has presented a court order obtained under questionable circumstances from a judge with personal connections to his family. He has offered no credible explanation for his wife's injuries, no evidence of mental instability beyond his own assertions, and no compelling reason why a terrified woman with a 4-month-old infant would invent such detailed allegations." Judge Miller paused, letting her words settle over the courtroom. "Furthermore, I find it deeply troubling that Mr. Marsh's primary concern appears to be his legal rights and his wounded pride rather than the welfare of his wife and child. A man truly concerned for his family's well-being would be relieved to find them alive and safe. Mr. Marsh seems more interested in reclaiming property than reuniting with loved ones." "Your Honor, I must protest." Robert's lawyer stood. "Sit down. I'm not finished." Judge Miller's voice cracked like a whip. The lawyer sat. "Based on the evidence presented, I am granting Mrs. Elena Marsh's petition for annulment of her marriage to Robert Marsh on grounds of fraud, coercion, and credible threat to her life and the life of her child. The marriage is hereby dissolved, effective immediately." Elena gasped, her grip on Jack's hand tightening. He felt relief flood through him, but the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am granting Mrs. Marsh, now Miss Elena Marsh, temporary protective custody of the minor child Mia Marsh, pending final resolution of custody matters. Mr. Robert Marsh is hereby ordered to maintain a distance of no less than 100 yards from Elena Marsh and her daughter. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest." Robert shot to his feet. "This is an outrage. You have no right." "I have every right, Mr. Marsh. This is my courtroom, my jurisdiction, and my ruling. If you don't like it, you're welcome to appeal to the Territorial Supreme Court. Until then, you will abide by my order or you will find yourself in jail." Judge Miller turned to Jack. "Mr. Rowan, you've petitioned to marry Miss Marsh immediately following the annulment. Is that still your intention?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And Miss Marsh, you consent to this marriage freely, without coercion?" "Yes, Your Honor." Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Dakota, I hereby authorize and recognize the marriage of Jack Rowan and Elena Marsh. You may exchange vows now, if you wish, or you may formalize the union at a later time. For legal purposes, the marriage is recognized as of this moment." Jack turned to Elena, who was crying openly now, tears of relief and fear and exhaustion all mixed together. He didn't have any vows prepared, hadn't thought beyond the legal necessity of this moment. But looking at her, at the trust in her eyes, despite everything she'd endured, words came. "I promise to protect you and Mia with everything I have. I promise to give you space to heal and grow and find yourself again. I promise to ask nothing from you except the chance to be worthy of your trust." He paused, then added softly, "And I promise that you'll never have to run again." Elena wiped at her tears. "I promise to trust you when I can, to try when I can't, and to remember that not all men are like the one I married before. I promise to let you help us, even when it's hard for me to accept help. And I promise," her voice broke, then steadied, "I promise that someday I'll be strong enough to stand on my own. But until then, I'll let you stand with me." Judge Miller's expression softened slightly. "Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Rowan, you may kiss your bride, if she's amenable." Jack looked at Elena, asking silent permission. She nodded, just barely, and he leaned in and brushed the lightest of kisses across her forehead. A promise, not a claim. The courtroom erupted in applause. People were standing, clapping, some of the women crying. It was as if the whole town had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. But through the celebration, Jack kept his eyes on Robert Marsh. The man stood frozen, his face white with rage, his hands clenched at his sides. His lawyers were pulling him toward the door, talking urgently, probably trying to get him out before he did something that would land him in jail. As they passed Jack and Elena, Robert stopped. His lawyers tried to pull him along, but he shook them off and leaned in close, his voice a whisper only Jack and Elena could hear. "This isn't over. You think a piece of paper changes anything? You think you can steal my wife and my child and walk away? I'll destroy you both. I'll burn this whole town down if I have to, but you will pay for this humiliation." "Mr. Marsh, you're in violation of the protective order." Sheriff Brennan appeared at Robert's elbow, his hand on his gun belt. "I suggest you leave this courtroom immediately and check out of your hotel. You have until sunset to be out of Willow Creek." Robert's eyes blazed with fury, but he turned and stalked out, his lawyers and hired men following. The door slammed behind them with enough force to rattle the windows. Judge Miller watched them go, then looked at Jack and Elena. "I meant what I said about that protective order. If he comes near you, have him arrested. And Mr. Rowan?" "Yes, Your Honor?" "Take care of your family. Something tells me you're going to need every bit of that protection you promised." Outside the courthouse, townspeople crowded around to offer congratulations and support. The blacksmith clapped Jack on the shoulder. The woman from the mercantile pressed a jar of preserves into Elena's hands. Even some of the ranch hands offered to help with anything that needed doing. It was overwhelming and humbling and more than Jack had expected. He'd spent so many years as a drifter, someone people barely noticed, that being the center of this much positive attention felt foreign. Dr. Hennessy appeared at his side. "You've given this town something to believe in, Jack. People around here see too much hardship, too much injustice going unpunished. Watching you stand up for Elena and Mia, it matters. Just doing what needed doing. That's what makes it matter." The doctor smiled. "Now, I suggest you get your wife and daughter home before all this excitement exhausts them." Your wife and daughter. The words settled over Jack like a coat that didn't quite fit but might, with time. He looked at Elena, at Mia sleeping peacefully in Sarah's arms despite the chaos around them, and felt the full weight of what he'd just done. He was married. He had a family. After 34 years of deliberate solitude, he was responsible for 2 lives that depended on him completely. It should have terrified him. Maybe it did. But stronger than the fear was something else. Purpose, significance, the bone-deep certainty that he'd finally stopped running from himself. They walked back to the doctor's house in the fading afternoon light, surrounded by well-wishers. Somewhere in the distance, Jack heard the sound of horses leaving town at a gallop, Robert and his men riding out before sunset as ordered. But Jack knew this wasn't over. The judge had been right about that. Robert Marsh was humiliated, legally defeated, publicly shamed. Men like him didn't accept defeat. They regrouped, they planned, they waited for the right moment to strike back. So Jack would wait too. And when Robert made his move, because he would make a move, Jack would be ready. He'd made promises today. Promises to Elena, to Mia, to himself. And he meant to keep every single one of them, no matter what it cost. The threat came 3 days later, in the quiet hours just before dawn when the world was still and darkness held its breath before surrendering to light. Jack woke to the smell of smoke. He was on his feet instantly, gun in hand, moving through the doctor's house with the practiced silence of someone who'd survived by staying alert. The scent was faint but unmistakable. Wood smoke, but wrong somehow, coming from outside rather than the stove. He reached the window and looked out at the street. Nothing moved in the pre-dawn darkness. Then he saw it. A flicker of orange light from the direction of the livery stable, growing brighter even as he watched. Fire. Jack didn't waste time with boots. He ran barefoot into the street, already shouting, "Fire! Fire at the livery!" Lights appeared in windows up and down the street. Men stumbled out of houses and the boarding house, some pulling on pants, others already running toward the flames. The livery was fully engulfed now, the old dry wood catching like kindling. Horses screamed inside, terrified. "The animals!" someone shouted. "We have to get them out!" Jack ran toward the barn, but the heat drove him back. The door was chained shut from the outside, deliberately locked. He saw it even through the smoke and flames, saw the heavy chain wrapped around the handles, the padlock gleaming in the firelight. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. Sheriff Brennan appeared at his side, coughing from the smoke. "The chain. We need bolt cutters." "No time." Jack looked around desperately, then spotted a water trough near the building. He soaked his shirt, wrapped it around his face, and ran at the door. The chain was strong, but the old wood around the handles was already weakening from the heat. He threw his full weight against it once, twice, 3 times. The wood splintered. The door burst open, and smoke and flame poured out along with 6 terrified horses. They stampeded past Jack, nearly trampling him in their panic. Men grabbed at their reins, trying to control them, leading them away from the burning building. "Is that all of them?" Brennan shouted over the roar of the flames. "I think so." Jack backed away from the heat, his lungs burning. The barn was beyond saving now. The best they could do was keep the fire from spreading to neighboring buildings. The town formed a bucket brigade from the well, passing water hand to hand to wet down the roofs and walls of nearby structures. Jack joined the line, working mechanically, his mind racing. The locked chain wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately trapped those horses inside, had set this fire as a warning. Robert Marsh. It took 2 hours to contain the blaze. By the time the sun rose over Willow Creek, the livery was a smoking ruin, and half the town was covered in soot and ash. Miraculously, no one had been killed, and the horses had all survived. But the message was clear. Jack found Sheriff Brennan surveying the damage, his face grim. "Marsh did this," Jack said. "It wasn't a question. Can't prove it. He left town 3 days ago. Witnesses saw him and his men riding east. Brennan kicked at a piece of charred wood. But that doesn't mean he couldn't have paid someone to stay behind and wait for the right moment. So what do we do? Legally? Nothing, unless we can connect him to whoever set this fire. Practically? Brennan looked at Jack. You watch your back and you protect your family, because this is just the beginning. Jack returned to the doctor's house to find Elena awake and terrified, Mia clutched against her chest. She'd seen the flames from the window, had heard the shouting, and her first thought had been that the house was under attack. "It's all right," Jack said, though they both knew it wasn't. "The fire's out. Everyone's safe." This was Robert, wasn't it? He's trying to scare us. "Trying to scare me," Jack corrected. "Showing me what he can do, what he's willing to do. He wants me to know that the legal ruling doesn't matter, that he can still hurt people I care about." Then maybe we should leave. Maybe if we went somewhere else, he'd follow. Men like Marsh don't give up just because their target moves. They see it as a challenge. Jack sat down beside her, his clothes still reeking of smoke. "We stay. We fight. And we make sure he understands that threats won't work." Elena was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "What do we need to do?" The question surprised him. He'd expected fear, maybe even for her to beg him to run. Instead, she was asking how to fight back. We need to make it impossible for him to hurt us legally. Right now, he can still appeal the annulment, can still try to claim Mia through the courts. We need to cut off that avenue completely. How? We make this marriage real, not just on paper, but in every legal way that matters. We establish ourselves as a legitimate family so thoroughly that no judge, no matter how friendly to Marsh, could undo it. Elena understood what he was suggesting. You want to adopt Mia, make her legally your daughter. If you'll allow it, it would give us another layer of protection. Marsh couldn't claim her as his child if she's legally mine. Would a judge even grant that? The adoption, I mean, when the marriage is so new? Judge Miller might. Especially if we explain the circumstances, show that it's necessary for the child's safety. Jack paused. But Elena, this isn't just a legal maneuver. If I adopt Mia, I'm committing to being her father. Not just now, not just until Marsh gives up, but for the rest of her life. I need you to be sure that's what you want. Elena looked down at Mia, at the baby who'd somehow survived everything. Her father's violence, the desperate flight across the prairie, the hunger and fear and uncertainty. When she looked up, her eyes were clear. I've watched you with her these past days, the way you hold her, feed her, the way you check on her every night, even when she's sleeping peacefully. You already care for her like she's yours. Making it legal just recognizes what's already true. She reached out and took Jack's hand. Yes, I want you to adopt her. I want her to have a father who'll protect her and love her and show her that men can be good and kind. I want her to have you. Jack felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he'd built 20 years ago finally crumbling. He'd spent so long believing he wasn't capable of this kind of love, this kind of responsibility. But holding Mia, looking at Elena's trust-filled eyes, he realized he'd been wrong. He was capable. He'd just never had a reason to try before. Then we'll talk to Judge Miller as soon as she's back in town. In the meantime, he stood, his jaw set with determination. In the meantime, I need to send Robert Marsh a message of my own. Sheriff Brennan helped Jack track down the man who'd set the fire. It wasn't difficult. The arsonist had gotten drunk at the saloon the night after the blaze, bragging about the money he'd earned for a simple job. The sheriff arrested him that afternoon, and by evening, the man had confessed everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. Robert Marsh had paid him $200 to wait 3 days after leaving town, then set the livery fire as a warning. The man swore he'd been told to make sure no one was hurt, just property damaged, but the locked chain told a different story. This gives us evidence, Brennan said, showing Jack the signed confession. I can send a warrant for Marsh's arrest to every town and territory within 500 miles. Will they honor it? Some will, others won't, especially if Marsh greases the right palms, but it means he can't travel freely without looking over his shoulder, and it means we have documented proof of his criminal intent. The sheriff leaned back in his chair. More importantly, it shows any judge hearing his appeals that he's not the concerned husband he claims to be. He's a criminal willing to commit arson to get revenge. Jack took the confession and read it carefully. The man had been thorough in his statement, describing how Marsh had contacted him, what instructions he'd given, how much he'd paid. It was damning evidence, the kind that could destroy a man's reputation if it became public. I want to send him a copy, Jack said. Of the confession? Let him know we have proof. Let him understand that if he keeps pushing, we'll use it to destroy everything he's built. His reputation, his business connections, his political ambitions, all of it. Brennan considered this. That's playing with fire, Jack. You back a man like Marsh into a corner, he might do something desperate. He's already desperate. The fire proved that. At least this way he knows the cost of continuing his vendetta. The sheriff nodded slowly. All right, I'll send a copy to his address in St. Louis, along with a warrant for his arrest. But Jack, be ready for whatever comes next, because men like Marsh don't surrender easy. A week passed, then 2. Judge Miller returned to Willow Creek for her monthly circuit and heard Jack and Elena's petition to adopt Mia. She listened to their reasoning, reviewed the evidence of Robert Marsh's violence and the recent arson, and granted the adoption immediately. Mr. Rowan, you are now the legal father of Mia Rowan, with all rights and responsibilities that entails, Judge Miller said, signing the papers with a flourish. And may I say, that child is lucky to have you. Jack held Mia as they left the courthouse, feeling the weight of the moment. He was a father now. Not by blood, not by accident, but by choice. The baby looked up at him with those dark blue eyes, and he wondered what she'd remember of these early days when she was older. Probably nothing. But he'd remember. He'd remember every moment. Elena walked beside him, and for the first time since he'd found her on the prairie, she looked peaceful. The constant fear had eased from her expression, replaced by something cautiously hopeful. "Do you think he'll give up now?" she asked quietly. "I don't know, but we've done everything we can legally. The rest is up to him." The answer came 2 days later, not from Robert Marsh, but from his lawyer. The letter was formal and cold, informing them that Mr. Marsh was withdrawing all legal claims to Elena and the child, dropping all appeals, and requesting only that he never be contacted by any of them again. Jack read the letter twice, looking for the trap, the hidden threat. But it seemed genuine. Robert Marsh was giving up. "Why?" Elena asked, reading over his shoulder. "After everything he did, all the effort to get us back, why would he just surrender?" Sheriff Brennan had the answer. He appeared at the house that afternoon with news from his contacts in St. Louis. "Marsh's political ambitions just died," Brennan said, unable to hide his satisfaction. "Someone leaked the arson confession to the newspapers. The story's all over St. Louis. Wealthy businessman hires criminal to commit arson in revenge against the wife who fled his abuse. His friends in the government have distanced themselves. His business partners are severing ties, and the territorial governor publicly condemned him." "Who leaked it?" Jack asked. "Don't know for certain, but I have my suspicions." Brennan's eyes twinkled. "Judge Catherine Miller has friends in the newspaper business, and she's never been fond of powerful men who abuse their wives." Elena covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her face. "It's really over? He can't hurt us anymore?" "He could try," Brennan said carefully, "but he'd be a fool to. Every eye in the territory is on him now. Any move he makes against you would be seen as proof of everything you've said. He's more likely to disappear for a while, try to rebuild his reputation somewhere else." After the sheriff left, Elena broke down completely. Not from fear this time, but from relief. She sobbed against Jack's chest while he held her, one arm around her shoulders and the other cradling Mia. They stood there for a long time, the three of them together, while the weight of the past weeks finally lifted. "Thank you," Elena whispered when she could speak again. "Thank you for everything. For finding us, for protecting us, for giving us a future when I thought we had none." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. You changed our lives, Jack. You changed who we are, what's possible for us. That deserves acknowledgement." Jack didn't know how to respond to that, so he just held her tighter. The weeks that followed were quiet, almost suspiciously so. Jack half expected Robert Marsh to appear at any moment, but as summer faded toward autumn, it became clear that the threat was truly gone. Marsh had left St. Louis, according to Brennan's sources, relocating to California where his reputation hadn't yet reached. He was starting over, trying to become someone new. Jack hoped he'd learned something from his fall. Probably not. Men like Marsh rarely changed, but at least he was gone, and Elena and Mia were safe. Jack took a job at the rebuilt livery stable. The town had come together to replace what the arson had destroyed, and the owner needed help. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it paid enough to support a family. The word still felt strange in his mind. Family. But every day it felt a little more natural, a little more right. Elena healed slowly, both physically and emotionally. The bruises faded, but the invisible scars took longer. She still flinched at sudden movements, still woke sometimes from nightmares of Robert's fists. But gradually, those moments became less frequent. She started to smile more, to laugh at Mia's baby noises, to look at the future with something other than fear. And she started to look at Jack differently. It happened in small moments. The way her hand would linger on his shoulder when she passed him at dinner, the way she'd seek him out when Mia learned something new, the way she'd watch him playing with the baby and something soft would cross her face. Jack noticed but said nothing, unwilling to push or presume. They had a marriage on paper, a legal arrangement for protection. Anything more had to come from her, in her own time. 3 months after the courthouse wedding, Elena came to him as he was repairing a fence behind the small house they'd rented on the edge of town. "Can we talk?" she asked. Jack set down his hammer. "Of course." She sat on the porch steps and he joined her, keeping a respectful distance. The autumn sun was warm on their faces, and somewhere in the house Mia was napping under Sarah Hennessy's watchful eye. "I've been thinking about our arrangement," Elena began, her hands clasped in her lap. "About this marriage and what it means." Jack's stomach tightened. "All right. When we married, it was for legal protection. A strategy, nothing more. You made that very clear, and I appreciated your honesty. You didn't pretend it was something it wasn't." "But?" Elena smiled slightly. "But things change. People change. I've changed, Jack. The woman who married you 3 months ago was terrified and broken and couldn't imagine ever trusting a man again. But the woman I am now—" She paused, searching for words. "The woman I am now sees what you've done for us. Not just the protection, but the patience. The way you've given me space to heal while still being present. The way you love Mia without expecting anything in return. The way you've treated me like a person with worth and agency instead of property to be claimed." Jack waited, hardly breathing. "I'm not saying I'm ready for everything a real marriage entails," Elena continued, her voice steady. "I'm not sure when I'll be ready for that, if ever. But I want to try. I want to see if we can build something real from this arrangement we made. If you're willing." "Elena?" His voice came out rough. He cleared his throat and tried again. "You don't owe me that. I didn't marry you expecting anything to change." "I know, that's why I want to try." She reached out and took his hand, the gesture still new and tentative but genuine. "You've shown me what a good man looks like, Jack. What partnership could be instead of ownership. I'd like to explore that if you would." Jack looked at their joined hands, at this woman who'd been through hell and somehow found the courage to hope again, and felt something settle in his chest, something that had been restless and searching for as long as he could remember. "I'd like that," he said simply. "More than you know." They sat there in the autumn sunlight, hands clasped, while Mia's baby sounds drifted through the open window and the future stretched out before them, uncertain but no longer frightening. Time passed, the seasons turned. Winter came to the Dakota Territory with its familiar harshness, but the small house stayed warm with the stove Jack kept burning and the quilts Sarah had given them. Mia grew, reaching for things with chubby hands, smiling toothless grins that lit up the room. Elena took a position teaching at the town's small schoolhouse, using the education she'd gotten before Robert Marsh had tried to break her. And Jack discovered something he'd never expected. He was good at being a father. Not perfect, not always patient, but present. Committed. When Mia cried at night, he was there. When she needed feeding, he helped. When Elena was exhausted from teaching, he took over baby care without being asked. It became second nature, this rhythm of family life. He and Elena grew closer slowly, carefully, building trust one day at a time. She told him about her childhood, her dreams before Robert had crushed them. He told her about the war, about the reasons for his court-martial. He'd refused an order to burn a farmhouse with a family still inside, about the years of drifting because he'd believed he didn't deserve roots. "You were wrong," Elena said one night as they sat by the fire, Mia asleep in her cradle. "About not deserving roots. You've always deserved them. You just needed to find the right place to put them down." You think Willow Creek is the right place?" "I think home isn't a place, Jack. It's people. And you're my home now, you and Mia." He kissed her then, gently, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She leaned into the kiss, her hand coming up to cup his face, and it was sweet and new and nothing like the desperate unions Robert had forced on her. This was choice. This was mutual. This was real. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, and with it came news from St. Louis. Robert Marsh had died in California, thrown from a horse during a drunken ride through wine country. No foul play suspected, just a man making bad decisions and paying the final price. The letter from his lawyer included paperwork dissolving any remaining legal connections. Not that any existed anymore, but it was the last official severing of ties. Elena read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and set it aside. "How do you feel?" Jack asked, watching her face for signs of grief or relief or anything in between. I don't know, she admitted. He was my husband once. Even if that marriage was a nightmare, I should feel something. But mostly I just feel, she paused, considering, free. Completely, finally free. He can't hurt us now. He can't come back, can't appeal, can't threaten. It's truly over. It was over the day Judge Miller granted the annulment. In my head, yes. But my heart needed this. Needed to know he couldn't change his mind, couldn't find some new way to reach us. Elena looked at Jack, her eyes clear. Now my heart knows too. That summer, they married again. Not for legal protection this time, but for love. It was a small ceremony in the church with half the town in attendance. Mia, now a year old and taking tentative steps, served as the flower girl with Sarah's help. Sheriff Brennan stood as Jack's best man, Dr. Hennessy walked Elena down the aisle since she had no father to do the honors. Judge Miller officiated, her stern face softening as she pronounced them husband and wife for the second time. I've married many couples in my years on the circuit, she said after the ceremony, but I've never seen two people fight harder for the right to love each other. May your future be everything you've earned. The years unfolded with their mix of joy and hardship, triumph and struggle. Jack and Elena had two more children, a boy they named Thomas after Sheriff Brennan, and another girl they called Sarah in honor of the doctor's wife. Mia grew up strong and confident, never knowing the fear her mother had lived with, never doubting that her father loved her absolutely. Elena became the head teacher at the school, known for her compassion with difficult students and her fierce advocacy for girls' education. Jack eventually bought the livery stable from its owner and built it into the most successful business in Willow Creek. They bought land outside town and built a real house with space for their growing family. But more than their material success, they built something else, a partnership of equals, a marriage based on mutual respect and genuine affection. They fought sometimes, as all couples do, but they fought fair. Jack never raised a hand to Elena, never even raised his voice in anger, and Elena learned, slowly but surely, that love didn't have to come with violence, that she could disagree without danger, that her voice mattered. On Mia's 10th birthday, as the family gathered for cake and celebration, Elena pulled Jack aside. "Do you ever think about that day on the prairie?" she asked, "when you heard Mia crying and stopped to help?" "Sometimes. Why?" "I've been thinking about how many men would have ridden past. How many men did ride past, probably, in the days before you came? They heard a baby crying in the wilderness and decided it wasn't their problem." She took his hand. "But you stopped. You chose to care, and that choice changed everything." Jack looked at their children laughing together, at the life they'd built from nothing but determination and hope. "I heard her crying and I couldn't leave her. That's all." "No," Elena said softly. "That's everything. That's the whole difference between the world as it is and the world as it should be. People who hear suffering and choose to stop instead of riding past." She kissed him, and through the window they could see Mia helping her younger siblings, Thomas and Sarah, teaching them how to play the game she'd invented. The girl who'd been thrown against a wall by her biological father now grew up knowing only gentleness and protection, teaching her siblings the same lessons she'd learned. Years later, when Jack was in his 50s and his hair had gone gray at the temples, a young woman came to Willow Creek looking for him. She was perhaps 20, well-dressed, educated, with dark blue eyes that reminded Jack of someone. "Mr. Rowan?" she asked, approaching him at the livery. "My name is Catherine Marsh. I believe you knew my father, Robert Marsh." Jack's hand instinctively moved toward the gun he no longer wore. "I did." "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said quickly. "I'm here to thank you. After my father died, his papers were sent to me. Among them was a letter he'd written but never sent, addressed to you. In it, he confessed everything, the abuse, the violence, the lies. He said—" Her voice wavered. "He said that losing Elena and Mia was the only thing that ever made him face what he'd become. That watching you protect them when he'd only hurt them showed him what a man should be. He said he knew he couldn't change what he'd done, but he hoped they'd found the life with you that they deserved." Jack was silent, processing this. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I wanted you to know that something good came from all that pain. After my father's death, his letter was my inheritance, not his money or property, but his confession. It freed me from the lies he'd told about my mother's disappearance. It gave me the truth. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. And it made me want to be better than he was. I'm a lawyer now, Mr. Rowan. I work with women trying to escape abusive marriages. Because of you, because of what you did for Elena, I have a purpose. She left an hour later, after meeting Elena and Mia and hearing their story from their own mouths. Watching her ride away, Jack felt the last piece of that terrible chapter close. Do you think he really changed? Elena asked that night. I don't know. Maybe at the end, when he had nothing left to lose. Or maybe the letter was just one more manipulation trying to control his legacy. Does it matter? Jack thought about that. No. What matters is that you're safe, Mia's safe, and we built something beautiful from something broken. On Jack's 60th birthday, his children and grandchildren, Mia had married and had 3 children of her own, gathered to celebrate. Looking around the table at the family he'd somehow accumulated, Jack thought about the man he'd been 30 years ago, that drifter riding toward Willow Creek to collect wages, planning to move on like he always did, believing he'd never be worth staying for. He'd been wrong. He'd been worth it. He just needed to hear a baby crying in the wilderness to discover it. Mia raised her glass for a toast. To my father, she said, her voice strong and sure, who heard me crying when I needed him most and never stopped listening. Everything good in my life started the day you chose to stop instead of riding past. Thank you for choosing us. Jack raised his glass, his throat tight with emotion he no longer tried to hide. Around him, his family echoed the toast, and he realized that this love, this belonging, this proof that one choice could change everything, was worth every moment of the journey that had brought him here. The sound of mercy, it turned out, wasn't just a baby's cry on the wind. It was the echo of that moment reverberating through the years, touching lives and shaping futures, proving that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply stop and care when the world says to keep riding. And Jack Rowan, who'd spent half his life running, had finally found the place where he belonged, not because it was easy or perfect, but because he'd built it with his own hands and his own heart, one choice at a time, until riding past was no longer an option. He was home,